So, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. Now, at Oxford Clay, I don't just make pottery, I also make resources such as books and courses and information for other potters who want to be more eco-conscious in their pottery practice but maybe don't know where to start or can't find out the information they need. So that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you, and I can't wait to get started. So let's go. Hello, welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Tomlinson. And this is part 5 of the September series that I'm doing on the podcast to celebrate the new book, Eco Conscious Pottery Colour. So the new book, which is available from the Oxford Clay website, and also Amazon if you want a paper copy of the book, which is a guide to colouring ceramics with scrap metals, glass, plant, ash, and clay. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about colouring pottery using clay. And specifically, we're going to be talking about using clay in pottery glazes to add colour to pottery glazes. So we're not really going to be talking about using clay as like a slip, which is like lots of potters use that. It's like an ancient pottery, like an ancient technique, for like adding colour to pottery is like mixing clay with water and adding that onto clay. We're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about using clay as an ingredient in a pottery glaze to add colour. And in Eco Conscious Pottery Colour, that book, I use clay in like two different ways. So it's not only as an ingredient sometimes in the base recipe of a pottery glaze. So there's like 80, so I mentioned before, there's like 80 pottery glaze recipes in eco-conscious pottery color. So not only is it used sometimes as part of the base recipe, it's also used as like an ingredient on top of a base recipe in the same way that you would use like a commercial metal oxide. Um, so yeah, in this series, we've been talking about eco-conscious pottery colorants, and we've been talking. So in episode 1, we talked all about like commercial metal oxides and how some issues with them, and then in episode 2, we talked about how we can recycle scrap metal, scrap copper, brass, bronze, and iron into pottery colorants like oxides like verdigris and rust, and we can use these to color pottery glazes. So we talked about that, and then in episode 3 we talked about glass and how we can recycle the oxides like already occurring in glass, and we can recycle those into our decorative pottery, not tableware. And then in episode 4 we talked about plant ashes, and how they have naturally occurring like trace metals in, and that we can create pottery glazes from those, and they can add like subtle colors to pottery glazes. Yeah, and I managed to keep the episode because I love talking about plant ashes so much. Managed to keep the episode, I think, to like 14 minutes or something, which is really pretty good going because I love talking about plant ashes. Yeah. Okay, so in this episode, we're going to be talking about clay. And just to say, it might seem a bit weird that we're talking about clay as like a kind of eco-conscious pottery colorant, and that's because we've spoken a lot about how commercial metal oxides are made from metal ore that is a non-renewable resource, from the earth. We're mining it from the earth. And then we talked about how we can, we are utilizing the principles of the circular economy to recycle glass and metal already in the supply chain into our pottery. And we also talked about, creating glazes from renewable resources like like leaves, plant ashes. So that's a renewable resource. We're not taking any like raw materials. So it might seem from the earth, might seem a bit weird that we're now talking about like using clay, which is a non-renewable resource, mined from the earth. And why is this an eco-conscious colorant? So the reason that we're using it as an eco-conscious pottery colorant is it takes less energy to mine and process than metal ores take to mine and take to process into commercial metal oxides, because they need to be heated to very, very high temperatures, processed that way. And yeah, so mining clay takes less energy, and that's why we've included it. The really cool thing about clay is that it basically naturally contains metals such as iron, and then we're using these naturally occurring metals, iron, in the clay, and then that's how we're adding color to glazes, like naturally that way. Okay, so let's talk about some reasons that we would use clay in pottery glaze to add color. The first is that you can create really unique colors. So clay, there's so many different types of clay, like across the globe. So in eco-conscious pottery color, I use two different types of clay. One of them is high mod ball clay, and I use that in some glazes, and that is mined from southwest England. Another one is red clay. And so both of those clays, I looked for like the provenance of them. I looked for the fact that they were from a single source. I looked for the fact that I knew there was good regulation in those areas in terms of like protecting people mining that clay, and the environment as well. So I know that, like, in terms of like where that clay is coming from, those are the kind of things you can look at. Like, you want a single source, you want to know it's from an area with good regulation that protects like people mining and the environment. And those are the things I looked for when I was picking the clays. Another thing I looked for is that I wanted like a high iron content. So quite often when you're like looking for clays, it will say this clay's got a high iron content, or if it's like a red clay, it's got a high iron content by like the color. So yeah, okay, so you can create really unique glaze colors, because each clay is like uniquely colored, across the globe. So it's really cool. You can also mix clay with different eco-conscious colorants, and you can create like incredible colors that way. So I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, but by mixing verdigris, which you can make from copper. Verdigris is like this beautiful green, bluey green pigment. You can mix red clay with verdigris in a glaze, and the recipes in the book Eco Conscious Pottery Color. You can create this like incredible grassy green color, which you can normally. I'm just holding up a photograph of it for people like watching on YouTube, but yeah, I'll try and describe it on the podcast. It's basically just like, if you imagine like a really, really bright grassy green color, you can make that color with 1% verdigris and 5% red clay, just added to like a base glaze recipe, stoneware glaze recipe. And normally you can only really get colors like that in pottery by using, oxides like chromium oxide that creates that like really bright, like beautiful grassy green. So yeah, it's an amazing way to create incredible colors. So yeah, unique colors work really, really well with other eco-conscious colorants. Like I said, in previous episodes of this series, they work so well with like, plant ashes and those, homemade metal oxides made from recycled metal. They all go together like so well. And there's 80 recipes in this book if you wanna see some more recipes made with clay. Okay, so another reason is that coloring pottery with clay is a real ancient tradition. So people think the first pottery glazes that potters ever created were made from a mixture of clay and like plant ashes applied to like the outside of pottery. So I really love that idea. I love this idea that, like, we can just, it's almost like we can feel the ancient traditions of pottery. We can almost just like, we're reproducing them. We can feel those potters, you doing those in the first pots ever made. We're like sort of channeling them in our own work now, and it's like a wonderful feeling. So yeah, that's another thing I really, really like about using clay. It's such a kind of beautiful natural substance that we use clay anyway. We can use clay in our work to color it too. Um, okay, another really cool reason is that it can be locally sourced. So some people actually just can collect their own clay depending on, where they live, access to like clay that's coloured with iron in the ground. Some people have access to areas where it's okay for them to collect clay, like by hand, yeah, and they can just collect their own clay and they can just locally source it. So that's definitely, if that's available to you, that's like amazing. Yeah. Okay, so like I said, clay can be used either as part of a recipe, base recipe, or as a colorant on top, and it's just used in exactly the same way as like other ingredients. Clay usually comes from a supplier powdered already, so it's just, you just use it as just as you would like making up like any other glaze recipe with different parts, based on weight. And obviously, you're wearing an FFP3 face mask, like protects your lungs when you're making glazes. But that's all there is to it, really. You can create some absolutely beautiful colors in pottery just by using clay. It's magical. It's amazing. So yeah, it's been so much fun talking to you about like making glazes with clay, but also this whole series. I just feel like I feel so lucky to have had the opportunity to like, yeah, do all the experiments in this book, compile it all. It's been so much fun writing it. It's been so much fun experimenting with different glazes, like creating all different colors. Um, weighing all the different ingredients out, and I've had so much fun this summer doing it, but it's also just been so nice to talk to you about it, and I'm so grateful for you joining me for this series. So thank you so much. If you join me for any part of this series about eco-conscious pottery color, just thank you for being here with me, and it's been wonderful talking to you about it. And yeah, if you have any questions, actually, because I have a feature of the podcast where we can answer listener questions, and please do send in your questions. It's so nice answering listener questions. So if any of the episodes of this Eco Conscious Color series has like piqued your interest and you had a question about eco conscious pottery color, please do send in your questions. So you can just send it in to the podcast. Just email the question, put in the subject line podcast question. So I know that you're happy for your question to be on the podcast. And the email address is just info@oxfordclay.co.uk. And then you can have your question featured on the podcast. I'll answer your question. So yeah, thank you so, so much for joining me. And I really, yeah, looking forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Oxford Clay podcast. And yeah, until then, wishing you very, very happy potting. And I'll see you then. Okay, goodbye. Oh, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you're interested to learn more about eco conscious pottery or making your pottery more eco conscious and sustainable, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.